Hello, all. I am Lindsay Pfister-Kerr from LPK Coaching. Thank you so much for joining me today for Permission to Pause. I am a former school administrator who was in the classroom, was a building principal, and then ended up in central office. And I am Lindsay Pfister-Kerr from LPK Coaching. And taking a moment to pause was an extremely challenging, difficult uh, part of my life for a very long time. And over the last couple of months, starting in May, I've been doing the perfectionist series on self-care. And it comes from a place of the fact that I struggle myself to be able to do these types of things that I'm sharing with you. So my hope today is that while we focus on taking a permission to pause, we're going to look at some ways as to what's getting in the way of you taking a moment to pause. What is making it difficult? How can you step into that? And then also, what are some ways to make sure you start to make it part of life and build on it? So again, I'm so excited to have you all here with me today. So when we think about taking a permission to pause, we can use many different words for pause. It could be a break, it could be a day off, an evening that we're not working, whatever might be. But we're looking at times that we are not actively always on, giving our brains, our bodies, even our feelings some time off. And it's extremely important. And I don't doubt you know all the statistics. I'll share a couple here, but you know how important it is. The challenge that we often run into as leaders, as employees, is what we know we should do and what is helpful for us and what we actually are doing can run into challenges. And a lot of times, can it be external? Sometimes, but often we can be what's getting in the way of that. So just some stats to give you some insight. Aflac did a study and found that 59% of employees are feeling burnt out. And I don't doubt some of us are close to that or feeling that way, or we've come through and are on the other side. So we know what that looks like. Also, some things that we know that taking breaks and pauses are helpful because when we've done them, we experience that. Research has shown that our productivity can go up 13% when we take a brief break, or that up to 91% of employees and leaders know that they feel refreshed with we're going to talk about what are called micro breaks, up to having a full week-long vacation and everything in between. We also know that research has shown that 40% of us feel reduced stress when we take time off or we take time to replenish ourselves. And you're probably sitting there thinking, Lindsay, I know all these things. Thank you so much. I already know that. That's great. I don't have time. And that makes a lot of sense. We all can come up with tons of reasons why. So my first question for you is, what's your barrier? What is getting in the way of you taking a pause or a break? And I don't doubt you can give me a list. Some common things that many of us come up with is, I have a huge workload. I don't have time to take a break. I don't have time to pause. I don't have time to eat lunch. I remember there were days when I was an administrator, especially a building administrator, that I would walk into the restroom at 4 or 5 o'clock and realize I hadn't been in there all day, nor had I eaten anything, because we just didn't have time. And there are days like that. There's one fire after another we have to put out. But if I really pushed you, I'm guessing those are not every single day. But a lot of times we make those fires we think that there are fires every day. And so our workload is huge. I don't have time. I don't have time to take a break. I don't have time to go for a short walk. I don't have time to feel the sun on my face. I've got to get this done. The reality is that workload's not going to go away. It's going to stay there and it can possibly grow. So we have to give ourselves some reality. The other question is if you keep trudging on, are you really attacking that workload? as you deplete yourself. The other things that we look at might be when I take a day off, it's just not worth it. It's easier to be at work. People are calling me. I'm still getting calls. I'm still answering emails. I'm still doing everything. I might as well just be there. And that can be a problem. And we're going to look at some ways as to how is that a genuine problem? And then in some ways, how can we be contributing to that? Other things that we may want to keep in mind that we think of are we experience FOMO. And for those of you who don't know what FOMO is, it's fear of missing out. What if there's a meeting and I'm not there and they talk about something that affects my department? What if on a given day something happens and I'm not there to deal with it? What if? What if? We're always worried we're going to miss something. So I'm just not going to take a break. I'm not going to take a day off. I'm not going to go handle that situation I need to. I'm not going to take a vacation. Another part of it can be we're guilty. We feel bad taking off. If I'm off, then my staff has to handle, or I'm pushing my work onto someone else, or I should be there because if something goes wrong, that's not fair to them. However, I often use the old idea that if you're they always tell you on an airplane, put your own air mask on before you put someone else's on, because if you don't have air, you can't get them air, which I still struggle with that, but it's absolutely correct. We need to be able to give ourselves air before we give it to someone else. And we need that. So while you may feel guilty, are you really able to still fully show up to fully support those people when you don't take that time? Um, and when we feel guilty that we're not there, then we can also fear that we are appearing less motivated or that we're not as dedicated. When we're leaving to go to our child's baseball game and get to really enjoy and take a moment for us, maybe I'm not staying like the person in the cubicle next to me or the superintendent in the district over there. And when that happens, am I really as dedicated, or are people going to assume I'm not? So we all have our own barriers. And as I was putting this together, I came across this image that really resonated with me. And if you watch this car, it's kind of like that barrier is us taking a day off. And while we may push past it, it does take its toll on us. We try, we push, we keep going, but it ends up cracking the windows or giving us some type of ramification for doing it. The goal is once we recognize our barrier and once we recognize what they are and deal with them, our hope is that the idea of taking a break, a small break, a little bit longer of a break, that we can look at that barrier. And even though it's still going to be there, because your mind's not going to ever stop saying, what about your workload? What about your team? What about if, what if, what if? The brain's not going to stop doing that. But we need to develop our skills. So when that barrier comes up, we're able to approach it like this guy. And yeah, it's there, but I can get over you, and with some style. So I ask you to take a moment and just stop for a second and ask yourself, what's my barrier? And that barrier you may not realize, but it's probably going to be rooted in some values, thinking about what your work ethic is, thinking about putting other people forward, thinking about being a team player. What is it that comes up for you? It can also be our beliefs. And I don't doubt a lot of those things in there are fears. What are our fears? Do we fear people seeing us less motivated? Do we fear that if you work in a school district and you're the superintendent, the board's going to wonder, they're taking off. Are they really as dedicated? Shouldn't they just be here 24/7? So what are and so I had a client one time share a great question with me that they used often, which is, what's the reality? So my suggestion, and you may not have enough time right now, but is to take and give yourself a moment and actually pull out a Post-it note, pull out a sheet of paper, use your planner, whatever you have, or your phone, if that's what you feel comfortable typing into, and ask yourself, when I think about taking a day off, what's my barrier? When I think about closing my door in my office for a moment and doing a couple of breaths, or when I think about not being, if not going home and then just continuing to work? What is stopping me from having dinner with my family? What is stopping me from going to my child's baseball game? What is stopping me from a couple of moments? Because the reality is, we only have so many physical and psychological resources available to us, whether we want to believe that or not. Most of us don't want to believe that. But it's like a battery. You can only, I am horrible at charging my cell phone, but I can only run it down so far before it's going to die on me. It's not going to turn on, no matter how much I push that button and think it will. And that's the same for us. You're going to keep depleting, depleting, depleting. And you are going to hit empty, whether you realize it or not. And what's going to happen then? Your productivity is going to slow. Your frustration is going to build. And burnout's going to creep in. And that is not where we want to be. So think about it. Even if I, which I can be habitually bad at, but throwing my cell phone and charging it in the car while I drive from here to the store just to get a little more charge on it, that's a micro break. When I actually plug my phone in and let it charge overnight, maybe that's more like a vacation. But you're no different than your cell phone battery. It's going to deplete, and we have to recognize that. So after you ask yourself, what's your barrier? And be honest with yourself. And some ways to deal with those is looking at them saying, is this a real barrier, or is this one I'm creating? Is it a real fear, or is this a fear that I'm assuming? Is this a real belief that I'm not a hard worker and that I'm lazy if I take a day off? Or is that a limiting belief I've set? Are there values that are playing in? Does my work ethic say I have to work from 8 to 7 every night? Or I have to work here and then go home and work more because my value says if I don't do that, I'm not living it. Ask yourself those questions. And after this, I will be sharing, I'll post it in the LinkedIn comments, and then and we'll be sharing on my website. You'll have, I'll give you, if it's not easy to remember all these things, I will give you something, just a quick reflection sheet or a form, a handout that you can go through and revisit these questions to help you. Because sometimes I'm much better at give me 2 lines and let me check some things off. That's an easier way to reflect than asking me to sit and do all of this on my own. So once you find out your barriers and either undermine some of them, validate some of them, or figure out what's limiting you, the next question that you may want to look at is, how can you reframe your relationship with breaks or pauses or time off, whatever phrasing you want to use? Because we have to reframe that. If we keep going with the way that we're currently thinking, we're gonna keep in the same loop that we're on. I can't take a day off. I can't take a few moments because of this, because of that, and then we're gonna keep going. So how can you reframe that idea with it? And one of the first ways you can begin by reframing your thinking with it is to reframe that breaks are a productivity booster. Think about it like a battery if you need to, but breaks rebuild you. Small ones, big ones. They don't take away. We're convinced that taking a break takes away from us, holds us back, stops us. In reality, breaks propel us forward. Breaks move us ahead. Breaks help us focus better. They help us to re-engage. They keep us motivated. Think about it this way. If the battery isn't working, think about this. If you let the oil run out of a car and keep going down and never get your oil changed, eventually you will burn that car out. And you're talking some seriously expensive repairs. It's the same idea. So how can you reframe this? You need to really accept and come to a way that works in your mind as to a break gives you more than takes away from you. And that's not easy to do because we can make a bunch of reasonings why. We want to make sure that our overall, whether if productivity is what's important, focus, creativity, engagement, whatever any of those are, we build those. So we need to start to realize that and not think we're getting something from pushing through that we're not. Also, I learned the phrase a while ago, and some people are familiar with it. It's moving from an idea of work-life balance to work-life integration. So we have some flexibility and not such hard lines. So when we look at work-life integration, before we used to say balance. I work here and then I have personal time here. And I'm going to set a hard line. But it can become stressful that if you need to take a call at night, I'm not supposed to be working now. And if you need to deal with a personal situation during the day, I'm not supposed to be doing this now. So we run into that challenge, we stress ourselves out. When we look at work-life integration, we give ourselves some flexibility. If you have a personal situation that is weighing on your mind, so calling to make a doctor's appointment or looking something up that is important for your child or yourself, if that keeps ruminating in your brain while you're at work, are you really focusing on what you're doing? If you were to take a 10-minute break and get that dealt with, would that allow you to come back and actually focus instead of rewriting the same email, rereading the same page, or whatever it is multiple times? And on the reverse of that, if there is a project that if you don't get that done, you can't focus on your family or focus on yourself, and you're sitting in a room with people, but all you're thinking about is getting that done, you can take that time to do that. That's flexibility to keep some movement without stressing yourself out. Now, do we have to be careful of creep? We absolutely do. We don't want our whole workday to become all personal, because that's what we've allowed it to creep outside of what we've said as okay. And at night, we don't come it's just one thing, or I'm finally going to feel like my to-do list is checked off, which realistically, unless we set one or two priorities, or if we have the Santa Claus list versus priorities we might get to. Santa Claus list is never going to go away. So giving yourself and being mindful that it doesn't creep out, but having that can also help you reframe that it's okay if I balance things, I can go back to actually being present where I'm at if I allow that flexibility. And again, as I said, it's developing that positive attitude towards downtime. Downtime isn't laziness. Downtime isn't bad. Downtime isn't, oh, I should be doing that. Downtime is, you need, just as you think work is essential and I have to do that, downtime is just as important to support that. So how are some ways you can reframe your relationship? It doesn't have to be long periods of time. Some practical ways to actually take a break. And when I say these, sometimes they can seem like, well, I know that's not, but I heard somebody say at a conference one time, common knowledge isn't common practice. So just because we know something doesn't mean we practice it. So what are some ways to engage with a break? Well, you can apply micro breaks. They're little tiny breaks, but they have some level of focus. And not that it's every day at 10:15, unless you want it to be that way. But micro breaks are small moments where you can just give your mind and your body a break for a moment. Maybe it's breathing. Maybe it's taking a walk down the hall. Maybe it's going outside for a moment. Whatever it may be. Sometimes when things were really, really stressful and I could feel myself starting to become overwhelmed, as a building principal, the only place I could go was actually the restroom. When I did get to be in central office, I was able to have my own office with a door. But sometimes when I was in the school that I was at, I had my own personal restroom in there, and I would go in there and close the door for a moment, because unless there was something critical, that's the only place people wouldn't bother me for a moment. And sometimes I needed that. Some days I just went through and it was okay, but when I really needed, I could feel that I was not being the best person I could be for my staff, for my assistant, for myself, for the people who were dependent on me. I had to do that. So taking a micro break, a short break, um, some other things, some other ways are making sure you eat lunch. Lunch is seems like a nice to have, but sometimes lunch is extremely important, and lunch can be a really good micro break. And lunch is not inhaling a sandwich or drinking a cup of soup as you run from one meeting to the next. That's not a break. And sometimes that's all you can do. But lunch could be a good way to go. So think about micro breaks, and also make sure you think about when, where, and how. How are you taking a break? I'm not talking doom scrolling on Instagram. I'm talking, getting away from something that doesn't give us more stress. So how? Is it a walk? Is it stretching? Is it just looking out the window? Whatever it may be. Um, when? You may not have a set time every day. And actually, research has found if we require people to take a break at a set time every day, it can be more stressful on them. So having some flexibility. When does it work? For me, when everyone was settled, no matter what role I was in, when everyone was settled where they needed to be in the morning, all the students were in their classrooms or everything had come in for the day, I could go get a cup of coffee. After lunch, after everyone had eaten, and I knew everyone was settled again in their classrooms, usually I could then go have lunch. And those were breaks. And where? Is it outside? Is it in your office? Like I said, sometimes it used to be the restroom because that's the only place people wouldn't find me. But wherever it is, maybe some people go sit in their car for a moment. Figure out what works for you. The next one is we want to think about setting boundaries and expectations. And the reason I use this is often when I think of setting boundaries, I like to picture, I'm a very visual person, but I like to picture these types of, I like to picture a wall that's not too high that I can't get over, that I can adjust. And at the same time, I like to see a gate. If I want to open it and let things in, I have control over it. But one of the things when we say, oh, whenever I'm off, everyone just keeps calling me. Are there ways, and some jobs are a little harder to do this with, but we can set limitations and expectations. And how can we do that? Well, I take calls up until 8 o'clock at night. After that, unless it's absolutely critical, I prefer not to. And I don't start taking calls until 7 a.m. unless there's a huge issue. We can set those, but if we don't, it's like we threw that gate open and people can just come through. So, what other expectations? When I'm off on vacation, here's the person that you can go to if you need help first. When I was in HR, my assistant was the first line of defense in a sense. So when I would go on vacation, I'd put, if you need anything, please contact her. And then she knew if there was a huge issue, she could then turn around, she would then call or text me. But there was a level in there. It wasn't just a straight line to me that I never got that break. So there are ways that we can do that to set expectations as to what does that look like and how can that look so that people understand that you're not just vanishing, you're giving them guidance, you're giving them ways to know when to get in touch with you. And it's not always easy, but we have to find what works and do that. And you're also being a role model. You're modeling for those who report to you that it's okay to step away. One thing I used to often do is I would either sign out of my email after I checked it or limit how many times I looked at it in an hour. Because I burnt myself out in one of my positions by always feeling that if an email came in at 11, I had to answer by 11:01, and that was 11 p.m. If it came in at 4 in the morning, and as soon as I woke up, I was checking those emails. I learned for me, I had to take the app off the phone. But for some, it can just be logging out because you got to go through the extra steps and turning off notifications that it's not always there. So another part can be delegating tasks. We can trust the people we hire. We're not pushing our work on them. If there's something that needs done, someone else can do it. Last week I was on vacation and it was hard. I have an amazing person that works with me, but sharing with her, asking her, it's like, oh, why should I put something on her when I could just do it? Because I trust her and she's capable. So I was okay with doing that. Or when I would go on vacation with my assistant in my previous role, it would be like, hey, these are some of the things that need done. And we have to get past that I'm dumping my work on them, or it's more trusting that people can. And last is use technology wisely. There are settings on your phone that you can use to help you. So using text instead of saying, I'm going to be on email. If you really need me, text me. And then you can decide if it's something for the next day or whatever. Using technology, do not disturbs aren't always possible. But if you can use them, those come in helpful. Or I'm only going to spend so much time on such and such an app. And then my phone helps me not to go on to that. It reminds me. So keep in mind that's important. And as I'm going through this, these things are not easy, and I'm not saying they are. And that's why other supports, whether it's exploring this with other people, with a life coach like myself, these things, if we're struggling with these and we're close to burning out, or we know that could happen, or our stress levels are high, support is really beneficial with these. So the last part of this is we know that we have to identify our barrier. There are some options for us to give a try to see what works for us. But we can say, oh, I want to, but we need to plan. We need to make the decision to do this. So we can know all of these things. But unless we make the decision to actually do this, it's not going to go anywhere. So how can you plan? Well, first off, you can assess your current situation. Are there some times in your day that may lend themselves to you actually working in a break? Like I said, sometimes mine was after lunch. Sometimes it was mid-morning after I checked my emails, made sure everything was addressed that needed to, and I could grab coffee. That can be a micro break. So that being said, we want to assess our situation and see what works best for us to work some breaks in. Are there times of the year that you can take vacations more likely than others? Are there times that of the day, or are there ways or days of the week that maybe you don't need to be on, that on Thursday nights, you're taking that whole night? Two, continue to recognize the importance of breaks. Breaks build you up, not hold you back. Find breaks that work. Is it a walk? Is it stretching? Is it breathing? Is it just enjoying a cup of coffee or your lunch? You have to make the decision to pause. You have to make the decision to do this. So, and again, for finding breaks that work, when you make this decision, how are you going to support it with expectations and some boundaries? And last, you can always reflect and adjust. You're not stuck with anything. Figure out, maybe you try something and it works, and maybe you try something and it doesn't work. So my hope today was to give you some ways to think about taking a break differently. Not just, I know I need to, it's good for me, I could do this. And if you have some ways that are working, that's fantastic. Stick with those, keep them going. But sometimes we really have to take a step back and say, what's stopping me? Is that what are those reasonings? What are those fears that are driving me, or those limiting thoughts? What are some simple ways I can do this? Or what are some real times in my schedule, not me telling myself I have to keep working, but what are some real times in my schedule I can pause? And then what steps am I going to take? Pick one thing to try over the next week. Think about, maybe you are going to eat lunch, or you are going to stand up from your desk for a moment and stretch and look out the window. Start small. Is there a half day you can take? Can you leave an hour early? Find ways and build. So my hope is that as you do this, and also last, as I don't want to forget, decide to give yourself a break. You are not an endless stream of resources, just like your car, just like your cell phone batteries or your car batteries. We are not an endless source of that. And we have to put back in to get something more out. So my hope is that this has given you some food for thought, some ways to approach this, and some guidance to start to do that. again, like I said, I'll be sharing a link to be able to get to, if it would help you to do some reflection, a guide sheet that will help you with that. And I am here to support you in any way that I can. My hope is that through, if it's life coaching that will help you with this, or resources on my website through my blog to help you do this. So I thank you for your time. I know it's not easy. And my hope is that you visit me on my website and you can sign up for regular mindset updates, things to keep you thinking about how to keep yourself healthy, how to keep yourself from lower your stress, and have and avoid burnout that can come with those of us who really struggle with being a perfectionist. And so I am Lindsay Pfister-Kerr. It has been my pleasure to share all of this with you today. And I've put many of these things and work every day to put these things into play. And my hope is that my experience can help you to work them in quicker and to make them part of giving yourself a much better mindset. So thank you again and take care.